Somewhere above Earth's atmosphere, a steel door was about to open, and behind it waited the one creature that had never lost a negotiation. For 400 years, the Vorkai Empire had never lost a negotiation, not because their diplomats were clever, not because their fleets were the largest in the galaxy, though they were. The Vorkai won because of a single brutal tradition. Before any treaty was discussed, before any terms were laid on the table, they brought the Keffel. The Keffel was not simply an animal. It was a weapon disguised as a living thing, bioengineered over 6 generations by Vorkai geneticists to be the perfect instrument of fear. 3 meters at the shoulder, jaws that could fold armor plating like wet paper, eyes that glowed a dull amber in low light, tracking heat and breath and the subtle tremor of a frightened heartbeat. It needed no orders. It needed no leash. It simply existed in the room, and existing was enough. 41 civilizations had faced the Keffel across the negotiating table. 41 had surrendered before a single word of the treaty was read aloud. The beast did not need to attack. The legends did the work for it. Whispered stories of cities that resisted, of fleets that hesitated, of ambassadors who had once made the mistake of reaching for a weapon. The Vorkai never confirmed or denied these stories. They didn't have to. Fear, once planted, grows on its own. Today, the chamber aboard the Vorkai flagship Threnvash was colder than usual. The lighting had been dimmed deliberately. Vorkai psychologists understood that low light made the human eye work harder, made the imagination fill in monstrous detail the dark refused to show. 16 Vorkai officials sat along a raised dais, their elongated faces unreadable beneath ceremonial collars. Below them, on the chamber floor, stood 3 human representatives flanking one woman in a simple gray service uniform. Her name was Corporal Nadia Vasquez, and she was, by any conventional measure, an unlikely choice to negotiate the survival of an entire species. She held no political office. She had no formal diplomatic training. Command had selected her for reasons that, to the watching Vorkai Council, made no sense at all, until the moment the chamber's far wall hissed open and the Keffel was led inside on a chain of reinforced alloy. The creature filled the doorway before it even fully emerged. Its shoulders rippled with muscle beneath patchy gray-black hide. Saliva dripped in long threads from a jaw that could have closed around a human torso without resistance. It growled, a low, bone-deep sound that vibrated through the floor plating and into the soles of everyone standing on it. Behind Nadia, one of the junior human attaches audibly gasped and stepped backward. The Vorkai Council speaker, a tall figure named Ulkestron, allowed himself the faintest curl of satisfaction at the corner of his mouth. This was how it always went. This was how it had gone for 400 years. "Behold," Dron said, his translated voice carrying the practiced cadence of a speech given countless times before in countless chambers to countless dying civilizations. "The Keffel has never been challenged. It has never been defeated. It does not need to attack you to prove its dominance. Its presence alone has ended wars before they began. We do not ask you to fight it. We ask only that you acknowledge what stands before you and sign the terms we have prepared." The chamber fell silent, waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the human delegation to do what every delegation before them had done: drop to their knees, beg for mercy, sign whatever was placed in front of them without reading a single clause. Nadia Vasquez did not move. She studied the Keffel the way a person studies a familiar photograph, searching for some detail they'd never noticed before. Her eyes moved from its heaving ribs, visible beneath the patchy hide in a way that suggested poor feeding rather than imposing musculature, to the way its claws scraped nervously against the deck plating, to the slight droop of its head despite the chain forcing upright, and then into the silence of the chamber that had broken 41 civilizations before hers. Corporal Nadia Vasquez began to laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't hysteria born of fear. It was warm, genuine, almost affectionate. The kind of laugh a person gives when they recognize something familiar in an unexpected place. The sound cut through the chamber like nothing the Vorkai Council had ever heard, and for the first time in 4 centuries, Speaker Dron felt something he hadn't felt in this room before: confusion. "She's underweight," Nadia said, mostly to herself, still studying the creature with something that looked disturbingly like sympathy. "Whoever's been feeding you isn't feeding you enough. Is he, girl?" The Keffel's head lifted. Its amber eyes, which attract the heartbeats of 41 terrified species, found Nadia's face and held there in a way its handlers had never trained it to do. For the first time in its existence, the Keffel did not growl. It tilted its head. The most feared creature in the galaxy had just done something it had never done before, and it had nothing to do with violence. Speaker Dron's confusion lasted only a moment before it hardened back into composure. 400 years of unbroken tradition did not crumble because one human laughed in the wrong place. He raised a hand, and the Keffel's handler, a hunched Vorkai technician standing near a control panel along the chamber wall, tightened his grip on the restraint controls. Ray provoked the beast into the customary display of aggression that always followed the initial reveal. "Human," Dron said, his translated voice losing some of its earlier theatrical polish. "You misunderstand the gravity of what stands before you. The Keffel has ended wars. It has reduced fortified positions to rubble. Do not mistake its current stillness for what?" Nadia interrupted. Still walking, slowly, deliberately, palms open and visible at her sides, toward the chained creature. "For patience? For exhaustion? Speaker Dron, when's the last time anyone checked this animal's teeth?" The chamber rippled with murmurs. Nadia's own delegation members exchanged glances of alarm. This had not been in any briefing, any rehearsed strategy session back on the transport ship. But Nadia had requested, 3 days earlier, full sensor logs and behavioral data on the Keffel from every previous negotiation. Data the Vorkai had handed over freely, confident that no amount of information could undo 4 centuries of conditioned terror. They had been wrong about what she would do with it. She stopped 2 meters from the beast, close enough that its hot, ragged breath stirred the loose strands of hair at her temple, close enough that the handler's hand trembled visibly on the restraint controls, half expecting to need them at any second. "You're not a monster," Nadia said softly, in a tone that carried clearly through the chamber's silence-amplifying acoustics. "You're an animal that's been hurt and starved, and trained to be afraid of being afraid. I've seen that look before. I had a dog growing up who looked exactly like that, after his first owner gave him back." She reached out one hand, slowly, no sudden movement, the way anyone who has ever approached a frightened animal learns to move without being taught, and rested it gently against the side of the Keffel's massive jaw. The chamber held its breath. The Keffel did not bite. It did not lunge. It made a low sound deep in its chest, something between a growl and a whine, the kind of sound a creature makes when touch and comfort are so unfamiliar that the body doesn't know how to categorize the sensation. "There," Nadia murmured. "See? Nobody's biting anybody today. This is—" Dron's composure finally cracked, his voice rising in volume and translated pitch simultaneously. "This is unprecedented. No species has ever attempted physical contact with the Keffel. You are putting your delegation at extraordinary risk, and I must insist." "I'm gonna call her Reyna," Nadia said, ignoring him entirely, still scratching gently beneath the creature's jaw in slow, even strokes. "It means queen in an old language back home. Seems fitting. You've been ruling this chamber for 400 years, haven't you, girl? Must be exhausting." The Keffel, Reyna, now, in at least one human's mind, leaned, almost imperceptibly, into the touch. Dron rose fully from his seat on the dais, his elongated frame casting a long shadow across the chamber floor. "Corporal Vasquez, I do not know what tactic this is meant to be, but I assure you it changes nothing about the terms before you. The Keffel's presence here is symbolic of Vorkai dominance, and your performance does not alter the military reality that—" "You're right," Nadia said, finally stepping back from Reyna and turning to face the dais fully, her expression shifting from gentle warmth to something far more pointed. "It doesn't change the military reality. Nothing about petting a hungry animal changes whether your fleet could level my planet. I know that. My government knows that. That's not why I came over here." She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for every Vorkai official in the chamber to lean forward, waiting. "I came over here," Nadia continued, "because I wanted Reyna to know that not everyone in this room is afraid of her. Because fear is the only language your empire has ever spoken in negotiations, and I wanted to show you that we're fluent in something else." Dron's expression, What little of it the human delegation could read through Vorkai facial structure, twisted into something between confusion and rising alarm. And what, precisely, is that something else, Corporal? Nadia smiled. It was not a smile of triumph or mockery. It was calm, almost gentle, the smile of someone about to share something they were genuinely proud of. Trust, she said, built over a much, much longer time than 400 years. She raised her hand and made a small, specific gesture toward the chamber's reinforced entry wall, the same wall through which Reyna had been led only minutes earlier. I brought mine, she said. The Vorkai Council did not yet understand the weight of those 3 words. They were about to. Steel doesn't bend on its own. So when the chamber wall began to groan, every Vorkai official in the room realized they had badly misjudged what humanity considered a weapon. For a long moment, nothing happened. Speaker Drawn glanced toward the chamber's entry wall, then back at Nadia, his expression suggesting he suspected a bluff, the desperate gesture of a species that had run out of options and resorted to theater. I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning, Corporal, Drawn said, though the edge in his translated voice suggested he understood perfectly well that something was about to happen, and he simply didn't know what. You will, Nadia said. From somewhere beyond a reinforced wall came a sound the chamber's Vorkai engineers would later struggle to explain in their incident reports, a deep, resonant thud, followed by a metallic groan that seemed to travel through the floor plating itself. The handler at the control panel flinched and instinctively tightened his grip on Reyna's restraint. Though the Kefla herself seemed entirely unbothered, her amber eyes still fixed on Nadia rather than the wall. A second impact followed, then a third. With each one, the wall, constructed from triple-layered Vorkai battle plating capable of withstanding direct kinetic weapons fire, visibly flexed inward, the metal protesting with a high, keening shriek. Counselor, murmured one of the seated Vorkai officials to Drawn, his voice low but audible through the chamber's acoustic amplification. Our scans of the human transport vessel showed no weapon signature capable of producing this kind of structural stress. Then our scans were incomplete. Drawn snapped, rising fully to his feet now, one hand moving instinctively toward the small sidearm holster at his waist, a gesture that, under any other circumstance, the human delegation might have read as deeply threatening. Nadia did not so much as glance at it. The wall bent further, the reinforced alloy buckling outward in a long, curved deformation that no Vorkai engineer present had ever witnessed in a man-made structure. And then, with one final groan of tortured metal, a section of the wall simply gave way, not exploding, not shattering, but folding inward like cardboard beneath the press of something enormous and patient. Through the gap stepped a creature unlike anything in the Vorkai bestiary database. It stood on 4 powerful legs, easily 2.5 meters at the shoulder when it dropped to all fours, its fur a deep, rich brown that caught the chamber's dim lighting in shifting tones of umber and gold. Its head was broad, its jaw heavy, its claws, each one longer than a Vorkai finger, clicked softly against the deck plating as it padded forward with unhurried, almost lazy confidence. 800 kilograms of muscle moved through the gap in the wall, as though strolling through familiar forest, rather than breaching a heavily fortified diplomatic chamber. The Vorkai Council had spent 4 centuries cultivating fear as their primary diplomatic instrument. They had built the Kefla specifically to exploit every species' instinctive terror response. But nothing in their extensive cross-species psychological databases had prepared them for specific, bone-deep dread that settled over the chamber as this new creature's small, dark eyes swept across the assembled officials with an expression that was, chillingly, to the Vorkai, almost bored. Counselor Drawn, Nadia said, her voice calm and almost conversational against the backdrop of pure stunned silence. I'd like you to meet Constantine. The bear, for that was unmistakably and impossibly to the watching Vorkai, exactly what it was, let out a low, rumbling exhale through its nose, the kind of sound any creature makes when it's just walked a long way and is glad to finally stop moving. Its massive head turned, scanning the chamber once, twice, before settling on the one familiar shape in the room. Nadia, Constantine is a North American grizzly bear, she continued, watching the control panic ripple visibly across the dais. 800 kilograms, give or take. Back home, an adult male like him can run down a horse. crush a bowling ball in one bite, and flip boulders the size of a small vehicle looking for grubs. We've been losing fights to his ancestors for about as long as our species has existed. She paused, letting the silence do its work, the way good negotiators always did. And about 12,000 years ago, she said, we decided to stop fighting them and started earning their trust instead. Every species in the room expected a battle between monsters. What they witnessed instead would unmake for centuries of Vorkai diplomatic doctrine. The chamber held its breath as Constantine crossed the remaining distance toward Nadia, his massive paws producing soft, deliberate thuds against the deck plating with every step. Beside him, Reyna, still restrained by chain and handler, let out a low, uncertain growl, the first sound of genuine confusion the Keffel had made since entering the chamber. She had never, in her entire engineered existence, encountered another apex predator who did not immediately register as either prey or threat. Constantine paid the Keffel almost no attention at all. His focus remained fixed entirely on Nadia, his small dark eyes warming with something unmistakably like recognition as he closed the final few meters between them. The Vorkai handler's hand, white knuckled on the restraint controls, hovered uncertainly. Every protocol in his training told him to provoke the Keffel into aggressive posture the moment another large creature entered her territory. But Reyna showed no interest in attacking. Only a wary, curious stillness, ears flattened not in aggression, but in something closer to bewilderment. Easy, Constantine, Nadia said softly, as the bear arrived in front of her and lowered his massive head toward her outstretched hand. What happened next would be replayed, analyzed, and debated across 41 alien legal systems for the next several decades, because what happened next was, by any reasonable measure of interspecies behavior across the galaxy, simply impossible. Constantine nuzzled into Nadia's palm. Not a feint, not a calculated display for the cameras the Vorkai had undoubtedly recording every angle of the chamber. A genuine, affectionate nuzzle, the kind any creature gives when greeting someone they trust without reservation. Nadia's other hand came up to scratch behind his rounded ear, and the 800-kilogram apex predator that had just bent reinforced battle plating to enter the room made a sound that could only be described, even by the most clinical Vorkai xenobiologist present, as a contented rumble. "He's a rescue," Nadia said, addressing the dais now while continuing to scratch behind Constantine's ear with the absent ease of long habit. "Found him as a cub, mother killed by poachers. Starving, scared of every human he saw. Took 2 years before he let anyone close enough to touch him. 5 before he trusted me enough to fall asleep next to me." She looked up at Speaker Drawn, and for the first time since the negotiation began, her expression carried genuine weight rather than calm performance. "You built a monster to frighten people into surrender," she said. "It took your geneticist 6 generations and unknown resources to engineer something that could destroy tanks and break cities just by walking into a room. And it worked. For 400 years, it worked, because every species you brought it had never learned anything except how to be afraid of things bigger than themselves." Drawn said nothing. The dais of 16 Vorkai officials sat in a silence that, for the first time in their empire's diplomatic history, contained no satisfaction whatsoever. "We didn't build Constantine," Nadia continued. "We didn't engineer him to be loyal or trainable or safe. He's still exactly what 12,000 years of evolution made him, capable of killing every single person in this room before your security forces could draw a weapon. The only thing that's different is that somewhere along the way, instead of trying to dominate creatures stronger than us, we decided to earn their trust instead." She gestured between Reyna and Constantine, the chained, starved weapon and the freely walking rescue, standing only a few meters apart in a chamber built for fear. "Look at them," she said quietly. "Really look. You spent 4 centuries terrifying people with a creature you've kept hungry and chained and isolated. I spent 5 years building a relationship with one I never had control at all. Tell me, Speaker Drawn, in this room, right now, which one of us actually is the more dangerous animal?" The Vorkai had ruled the galaxy through terror for 4 centuries. They were about to learn that terror has a shelf life, and trust does not. Speaker Drawn's hand finally fell away from his holstered sidearm, though whether from a recognition of futility or something closer to genuine reflection, none of his fellow council members could later say with certainty. He remained standing, his elongated frame rigid, his translated voice, when it finally emerged, noticeably quieter than it had been at any point in the negotiation. "You understand," he said slowly, "that this changes nothing about the military comparison between our civilizations. One bear, however large, does not offset the Vorkai battle fleet." "No," Nadia agreed easily, still scratching behind Constantine's ear as the massive bear settled into a comfortable seated position beside her, utterly unbothered by 16 pairs of alien eyes fixed on him. "It doesn't, and I never said it did. If this were purely a contest of force, speaker drawn, you'd have already won. Your fleet outnumbers our entire defensive capacity, and we both know it." This admission seemed to catch Drawn off guard more than anything that had preceded it. He had expected defiance, perhaps even desperation dressed up as confidence. He had not expected a calm acknowledgement of military reality from someone who had just walked an apex predator through a ceremonial chamber wall. Then what precisely was the purpose of this demonstration? He asked. Nadia stood fully and faced the dais, her posture relaxed but unmistakably deliberate. "For 400 years, your empire has built its entire diplomatic strategy on a single premise. That fear is the most efficient way to secure compliance. Bring something terrifying into the room. Let the terror do the negotiating, and the treaty signs itself. It's worked 41 times. I understand why you've never questioned it." She gestured toward Reyna, still chained, still watching the unfolding scene with an expression no Vorkai handler had ever documented before, something that looked almost like longing. "But fear has a fundamental weakness that trust doesn't," Nadia continued. "Fear requires constant maintenance. You have to keep the monster hungry, keep it isolated, keep every civilization you negotiate with convinced that resistance is pointless and submission is the only rational choice. The moment fear stops working, the moment someone in the room isn't afraid, your entire strategy collapses because you never built anything underneath it. No relationship, no loyalty, nothing that holds when the fear runs out." She placed a hand on Constantine's broad head, and the bear leaned into it with the easy trust of an old, familiar bond. "Trust is slower," she said. "It took us 12,000 years to learn how to build it with creatures who could kill us without effort. It took me 5 years with this particular bear. But once it's built, it doesn't need maintenance through hunger or isolation or chains. It holds because both sides chose it and keep choosing it every single day." Drawn's gaze moved, almost involuntarily, toward Reyna, toward the starved, chained creature his empire had relied upon for centuries, who was now staring at Constantine with an expression that, for the first time, every Vorkai official present recognized not as predatory hunger, but as something achingly close to envy. "You came here today," Nadia said, "expecting us to surrender because you brought the most frightening thing in your arsenal into the room. And I understand why that strategy has never failed you before. But humanity didn't survive this long by being the strongest species in any room we've ever stood in. We survived by learning, over and over again, across thousands of years, how to build alliances with things that could have destroyed us. Wolves, horses, this very bear standing next to me, instead of simply trying to dominate or outmuscle them." She looked directly at Drawn, her voice steady and without malice. "Your empire has spent 400 years getting very good at making people afraid. We'd like to propose something your diplomatic doctrine has apparently never considered as a viable strategy at all." "And what is that, Corporal?" Drawn asked, his voice carrying, for the first time, something that sounded almost like genuine curiosity rather than imperial authority. Nadia smiled, not the calm, controlled smile of negotiation theater, but something warmer, more hopeful. "Negotiating with each other," she said, "instead of negotiating with our fear. 400 years of conquest were about to end. Not with battle, but with a single act of kindness that no empire had ever planned for." The chamber remained silent for what felt, to every person present, like a genuinely unprecedented length of time. Speaker Drawn lowered himself slowly back into a seat on the dais, his gaze shifting repeatedly between Nadia, Constantine, and the chained Keffel beside her, as though trying and failing to reconcile what his 4 centuries of diplomatic training had told him to expect with what had actually unfolded in front of him. Finally, one of the other seated council members, an older Vorkai official who had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, his ceremonial collar marked with insignia denoting decades of imperial service, rose to his feet. "Speaker Dron," he said, his translated voice carrying a weight that silenced even the faint ambient hum of the chamber's life support systems. "I have sat on this council through 11 of the 41 negotiations conducted with the Keffel. I have watched 11 civilizations surrender before a single word of our terms was spoken aloud. I have never once, in any of those 11 negotiations, seen anything resembling what has occurred in this chamber today." He gestured toward Reyna, his expression, unreadable by human standards, but unmistakable in tone, heavy with something that might have been regret. "Look at her," he said. "Truly look at her, Speaker. She has never once, in her entire existence, been touched without the intention of provoking violence. She has never been fed beyond the minimum necessary to maintain aggression. We built her to be feared. And in doing so, we built a creature who has never once experienced anything resembling the bond this human shares with her own." Dron's jaw tightened, but he said nothing to interrupt. "I do not know what this means for our diplomatic doctrine going forward," the elder council member continued. 400 years is a long tradition to question in a single afternoon. But I know what I witnessed today, and I know that the human delegation did not need to threaten us, did not need to demonstrate superior firepower, did not need to do anything beyond show us, plainly, without artifice, what trust actually looks like when it has had time to grow. He turned to Nadia, Corporal Vasquez. "What would your government propose in place of the terms we originally prepared?" Nadia had spent the last several minutes quietly scratching behind Reyna's ear as well, the chained Keffel having gradually, hesitantly, leaned into the unfamiliar gentleness the same way Constantine once had, years ago, in a quiet sanctuary half a world away from this chamber. The great predator's amber eyes had softened, just slightly, into something almost peaceful. "A treaty built on exchange instead of submission," Nadia said. "Trade agreements that benefit both our civilizations rather than extracting resources from a defeated one. Scientific cooperation. Earth's xenobiologists would very much like to understand how Reyna's species was engineered, and I suspect proper veterinary care and an actual diet would change quite a lot about how she behaves in rooms like this one." She paused, glancing down at Reyna with something gentler than pity. "And I like to formally request, as part of these negotiations, that the Keffel be retired from diplomatic service entirely. She's done enough conquering for one creature in one lifetime. She deserves better than another 400 years of being someone's weapon." The chamber fell into a different kind of silence now. Not the heavy, fear-soaked silence that had filled the room when the negotiation began, but something quieter, more reflective, the silence of an empire genuinely considering, perhaps for the first time in 4 centuries, that its entire approach to galactic diplomacy might have been built on a foundation far weaker than anyone had ever tested. Speaker Dron rose one final time. "The Vorkai Council will need time to deliberate the full terms," he said. "But I believe I speak for this body when I say that today's negotiation will be remembered, not for the treaty we sign, but for the precedent it sets." The treaty was, in fact, signed within the week, the fastest negotiation in recorded Vorkai history, conducted not through fear, but through terms both species genuinely found worth keeping. Nadia Vasquez was promoted shortly after return to Earth, her unconventional methods becoming the foundation of an entirely new diplomatic training curriculum. Constantine received an official commendation from 2 governments, a ceremony he attended with considerably more interest in the catering than the speeches, and was, as promised, given a very large and very fresh fish. Reyna, after months of recovery under joint human-Vorkai veterinary care, was eventually relocated to a protected sanctuary, where, for the first time in her engineered existence, she learned what it meant to simply exist without being anyone's weapon. And across the galaxy, slowly, deliberately, an old and brutal tradition began to change, not because anyone built a bigger monster, but because one woman proved that the deepest strength any civilization could possess wasn't the size of its weapons. It was the trust they had earned from the creatures powerful enough to destroy them.